Hello guys, and welcome back to this HTTP course. In this lecture we are going to take a deeper look at the status codes that we can receive from an HTTP request that we make to a web server, and this way we are going to understand more in depth the HTTP protocol and multiple parts of it, as to also what they stand for. Now, the reason why status codes are important in the HTTP protocol is because they are issued by a server in response to a client's request made to that web server, and are the most relevant short pieces of information about how this request of the client went when it came to the actual web server. Now, the first digit of the status code is the most important digit, and it specifies one of the 5 standard classes of responses. The message phrases shown are typical, but human-readable alternative may be provided along with them. Now, in general, as I've said, the HTTP return codes, you need to remember that have 3 digits, and that's the standard for them. If the digits are starting with 1, so it starts with 1 and then it has 2 other digits, then the status of that return code is informational. So you can tell what the status of a return code is just by looking at the first digit of it. Informational, so if it's starting with 1, it means that the request was received and the process continues. Now, if the first digit is 2, it means that it was a successful operation. So more in detail, the request was successfully received by the web server that the client made the request to. It was understood, and not only that, but it was also accepted. When it comes to starting the 3 digits with the digit of 3, that means that a redirection, as in further action, needs to be taken in order to complete the request, was taking place. For 4, that comes from client error. So if your 3-digit code starts with 4, something went wrong on the client side, and the request contains bad syntax or it cannot be fulfilled. So that's something that went wrong, again, went on the client side, so not on the server side. And now, for example, you may know by heart already the classical return code of 404, which means not found. So the client was trying to access a resource that with its request to a page that was no longer at that address, or it could not be found by the web server that the request was made to. Now, lastly, the last digit that the HTTP code can start with is 5. And the 5 comes from the server error. So again, something went wrong, but this time on the server side, as in the server either failed to fulfill the request that the user has made to it, or maybe it was an invalid one and he didn't know how to map it. Now, on a more concrete level, we can run through some more concrete return codes in order to understand what each of them are and stand for. For HTTP methods, if the request was executed with success, you would get a 200 return code. And this code is often accompanied by the OK keyword. And it means that everything was okay with your request, so the request was successfully accepted, received, and understood. The 404 return status means that the resource that we were trying to access was not found, and most of you may already know that. But furthermore, the 204 return code means that there is no content to be shown. The 409 code means that the method you are trying to execute is not allowed, and this happens almost always on the put and delete request methods. Lastly, of course, we have the 405 return code, which means that the resource you are trying to create is in conflict with another one that already exists. So if you remember from the last lecture, a post method was creating a new resource on the web server, and if you're trying to create a resource, maybe with the same primary key as another resource that already exists there, well, then you would get a 405 return code. And basically, you will not be able to create another resource with the same data as another one that already exists in the database. Of course, there are a lot of other codes that exist, but in general, you are either given a short reason as to explain that code that you received. So for example, on 200, you would have the OK keyword, but most of them, you can Google them if you have a more exotic, as to say, return code, and you will be safe to understand exactly what happened with your request and why you received that code and what it means moreover than that. So this was about it for the HTTP status codes that you may receive when trying to make a request. Next, we are going to talk about the HTTPS protocol, so the more secured HTTP protocol that was implemented more recently than the HTTP one was, and we are going to see a comparison in between them in order to understand which one does what better and choose one when creating our own web pages. So if that sounds interesting, I really look forward to see you guys there, and I really appreciate that you stuck with me up to the end of this lecture.